It's like we're in another age of surveys. So much information being compiled, looking at timelines again. And what I find interesting, at least interacting with a number of people I do interact with, is that whereas at one point museums and archives were prerogative of the state, it's becoming more and more personalized. And just 2 sessions ago, it was very interesting to see how 2 individuals and a small team is putting together an archive, which is building up with great velocity. And in the presentation we just had, the slowness of these processes was being communicated. Now what's interesting is that as archiving and as museumizing and as collecting and all of these things move into the domain of the personal more and more, it's obviously coinciding with new technologies. It's coinciding with especially digital technologies where people can collect, where people can document, and also have data which can seem to have a lot of veracity, and it should have. Now, what I think it then brings the question back to us as to, like someone mentioned yesterday about post-internet artists, what do we expect of museums in the post-internet age? What do we expect of museums, and what do museums expect of themselves in an age where people have begun archiving and establishing their own collections and giving validation to them? I want to just direct a very small question on this note to Ruba about the timeline that she was developing, because here's a museum that's under construction. The museum's obviously trying to build on various facets of their body, and one of them being the timeline. Would be interesting to find out how this is being approached. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. When the project first started, it was mainly based on political events, which were developed by the Institute of Palestine Studies. But when we started our conversation with visualizing impact, we started realizing the fact that this is very reductive about the Palestinian story and history, and there was a need for like additional captive engaging information for the public outside. And it was then when we started looking at our projects and exhibitions as primary sources, and where we started thinking about the oral history that we've been collecting as a new kind of narratives and a new engaging content to be included. So the platform is like perceived as a space where people can, yes, see a chronological upfolding of events, but also it's a space where they can look for a more attractive and more kind of personalized individual stories.
But, I mean, just very basically asking, is it going to be a timeline that is spatially laid out? Is it going to be in the form of a book? Is it going to be online? How is this being imagined?
Yeah, it's imagined as an online platform, but we're also in conversation about having an in situ, like a physical space also. We still don't know how this will happen, but eventually it will happen.
Can I add? Oh, sorry. I'll add one thing. So what I think is very interesting or particular to the Palestinian case, among many other cases, is the diaspora and the fact that there's, you know, in the project that you're involved in, there's a structure, there's a building that will be in existence, but I think that in the age of technology and considering the diaspora, can you talk a little bit more about how the programming, you've mentioned that you're going to be working with different institutions in different cities, but how do you imagine the use of a website or the internet to sort of be the space of the museum, to be a virtual museum in a way, to connect with individuals around the world who can't come to Ramallah or can't come to see the museum?
Well, the idea is that all the exhibits and catalogs will be online in a way, and we're also developing like educational kits for each of these exhibits to be used by Palestinians or whomever abroad. Plus, the timeline project itself, it will allow for like people to be uploading their own stories And same applies to the family album project, where we'll be like creating a space only for people from abroad, like uploading their own stories and all the narrative related to it.
I just wanted to add on that, also for us, having our artworks available online and information available online is really important, because it isn't easy to come to Qatar for a lot of people. We have people from Lebanon, from Syria, from Iraq. It's almost impossible to come to Qatar at the moment. So this is a project that we really hope is helping to cross that barrier.
And what I think is very interesting about the encyclopedias, the standard definition of encyclopedia is an entry, maybe with text, a couple of images, but it seems like the encyclopedia is really the archive of the museum in a way, beginning with the name of an artist and going into the paperwork, the detail, the images, and crowdsourcing. I think that's something that you see with both of these projects, or you're imagining that kind of people can approach you and correct you or add to it. So do you mind speaking a little bit, Joanne, about some of the reactions? The encyclopedia is quite new. How have people responded to it? Have people been offering information, giving material? What sort of responses have you had?
Well, I think with the first 30 biographies that went online, we were very careful. A lot of editing happened, a lot of translating and reviewing of that. On the positive side, we have had some people who've actually contacted us because they've discovered some artworks in an attic, and they've found a link to that artist through the encyclopedia. They've contacted us, and now we're actually hosting an image of that artwork that would have otherwise, been unseen on the encyclopedia, which is great. We have some other collectors, investment bankers that have come across the encyclopedia to ask us questions about the artists, and we've also managed to host the images of the artworks online. There was one lady from Egypt. She's the daughter of Saleh Yusri. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. She contacted us because she found his name in a biography of another artist, and she was actually asking us if we had any of his artworks in our collection, and we don't. So that's also a way of us to start looking into our collection and the relationships between the different artists and say, hey, maybe we should be investing in these other artists as well. And then also considering that maybe we could, perhaps commission her to help us write a biography, give us a CV, images of artworks.
There's this new media theorist by the name of Lev Manovich, who, in one of his essays, I think 6 years ago, had written something very interesting about how, for the longest time, we lived in an epoch where perspectival view was the way of making sense of the world. The chaos of the world could be organized perspectively. And in the new age of the database, it changes that fundamentally. And that's why we talk about multiple perspectives. That's why we talk about multiple entry points. Keywords, databases, all of these things become almost central to it. And technology, therefore, doesn't become simply an added layer onto the way we think or imagine knowledge and information. In fact, it changes our imagination of knowledge fundamentally, right? So with keywords being a central discussion to the workshop that we had in the morning, maybe you want to say something about how you're looking at keywords in this project?
Myself and my team, we don't have any background in IT. We really, we don't know much about computers other than Facebook and social media. So this was a huge challenge to us. So when we had all of the content ready for the biographies, we had all of the artworks ready, the supporting material, IT came on board. They said, where's your keywords? And we're like, well, what are you talking about keywords? You just put it online, right? Like, no, everything needs to link with each other. So an image needs to link to the artist, it needs to link to the medium, it needs to link to a photograph, it needs to link to... There are so many links between each other formed by keywords, but then also those keywords need to be translated to Arabic as well, so that function is fully capable on the Arabic website as well. But keywords are really the backbone of the encyclopedia and what makes it so different from a lot of other resources available online.
And with the timeline, of course, we're all, by the time of the 21st century, critical of linear narratives, of single linear narratives. So with the timeline that you're imagining, are you imagining it to have multifaceted manifestations, or is it going to be a one-line history? Or you were mentioning something in a conversation we had earlier of having it on multiple tracks, perhaps parallel tracks of timelines. Maybe you could tell us a little bit.
Well, we're still negotiating and and discussing. So we're at an early phase of research and discussion. But yes, of course, it has to be multifaceted. Also because it has to represent all Palestinians, and not only, it has also to attract people, even persons who are not even interested in Palestine, but they're interested in I don't know, something like hiking, and then they can find like something about hiking tracks in Palestine. So of course it has to be multifaceted.
Should we open it up and see if anyone has questions?
Thank you. I'd like to maybe hear from the panelists about how you think about physical space versus what the opportunity is in online space. From a perspective of archive, the limitations of a physical space is that you construct a room and then it's limited by X square meters and that's it. Obviously online it opens up an entirely expansive, infinite space. But what I think hasn't been thought enough about in general on the online world is that what we're putting to the face of the public is actually the archive that's usually closed, but we're not necessarily thinking about the curated content. So a museum curates content, but then a web space just has the singular structure that you go into and you get bored by, and then it becomes relegated to academicians. So in a way that museums have a budget to curate content offline, and how can that same mentality come onto the online, where the online world adapts and changes and refreshes much more in response to that need for change by the user, and not just the validity of the content, but also the excitement of the user experience.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is how to develop a website that's to create an experience for a user that's user-friendly, that's interesting, that's exciting, and that's one of the biggest challenges. And I can tell you from one of the projects I've worked on this which research that was transformed into a physical space, into an exhibition recently at the MACBA in Barcelona. We couldn't imagine transforming that research into a book, into a physical form. A space was the only way we could imagine doing it. And now we are planning to tour the exhibition, but trying to imagine an online space for this exhibition, not to be a repository for all the material, but in fact somehow imagine recreating the exhibition or questions within the exhibition is a huge challenge, because you need a lot of great thinkers and web developers and minds to really think about how to develop a website that's engaging. And I think that's a challenge for all of us to think about that. And I think maybe in Dubai there will be some really great examples of virtual museums, museums without walls, and I think that there may be some reference points, at least for projects that show artworks or images of artworks. But how to think beyond that, of how to present audio and video and images is definitely a challenge for all of us.
I think one of the great things about having their keywords on the encyclopedia is that it's really opening people to come and to curate their own projects and exhibitions. So you can, for example, keyword search the Baghdad Modern Art Group and you will find all of the artists. You can keyword the D Group and you'll find the artists. You could keyword a university, so you could find out who were the artists in our collection that all studied in Paris, or who studied in Russia, or who studied in Poland. So I think with the biographies, we're just putting the most honest and consistent information out that we can, and images from our collection and other collections for then the visitor to then come do what they would like to do with that. Does that answer your question? And also having it online, you know, we don't have to pay for the exhibition's costs. We don't have to pay for conservation. We don't. I mean, it's you know, it's a great way to reach people all over the world. But there is nothing like seeing, you know, the artwork in front of you. But you know, unfortunately, we're not all that lucky.
It answered on two levels. One simple word: augmentation, where the virtual and the actual coincide in great capacity. And I mean, we're using Google Maps all the time. I think probably nowhere else in history have maps been used by so many people all the time. That's one example of where the virtual and the actual are not as separated or untethered from each other. So that's on one level. I think the other question of yours about curating content is I mean, it's interesting to me because I think, and this was something we discussed in the workshop earlier today, and it will be, again, discussed tomorrow, is about how archives no more are places where we're waiting for people to come and use. We always have to keep the space activated. And so I don't think ever before have archivists been so compelled to curate or to have their content curated, to have it presented with the urgencies of the time. And I think all of us here are coming to archives with that compulsion, with that urgency. And yeah, I think even your work, it's fascinating because one, it's presenting multiple perspectives of things. It's not a one-point perspective. It's juxtaposing things. And it's juxtaposing things that are urgent to us with vast amount of data that's collated. So in a sense, there is a curatorial drive which is beyond just curators as figures who work in museums and galleries. It's a curatorial approach to knowledge, I think, is what we're all getting at.
Do we have any other questions? I think there's time for maybe one more question. Burning questions? No one?
How do you deal with the lack of intellectual property rights in the Middle East, in the Arab world? I suppose this is something that applies also in some parts of South Asia as well, maybe in India. How do you, you're putting out all this images, documents. How do you deal with someone coming in, copying them, reusing them? Do you is it worth putting them in so fast, or is it just a byproduct of the 21st century that there will be people who will copy this? And do you use Creative Commons?
We've recently experienced this with Manuela Georgosian. So she has a lawyer and she has very strict copyright laws related to all of her images. So that's why that's taken a very long process. Other people, it's the Ahmed Abu Ghazi archives. He's more than happy to share his collection with us, but in order to get high-resolution images, it's a very lengthy process. Also related to Mahmoud Mukhtar, there were some copies of magazines that were printed by Al-Musawwar. We would love to publish them on the Encyclopedia, but Al-Musawwar is not, it's down, and I think it's being looked after by Al-Hilal, Dar Al-Hilal. So we're trying to get in contact with them, but again, they're non-responsive, and so we will go to the extent that we can. We will, go, and we will wait, to get a response. But if not, we'll publish it and say we've gone to every measure that we can to get the rights to the images. If you think you're the copyright holder, then we'll remove the image. Also, all of the images that we have available online are very low resolution, so you can't really print them if you do pull them off the internet.
Well, I think we're dealing with it at the Asia Archive, both in terms of the legal protocols as well as the ethical ones. So where the copyrights are not there, or where we don't know who the copyright owners are, we try and find the appropriate parties, and we make our best efforts, and then only do we disseminate any information. But yeah, at the organization, we're still working towards Creative Commons, and yeah. I think that is, it's not going to be a question that the way it was dealt a few years ago. It's changing with the times. We know it's out of control. It's totally out of control. So the circulation of things, of digital information.
And I do firmly believe that everything should be available open access, so
Yeah.
maybe one day.
At which point we bring this session to a close. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.